moment, you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am so incredibly excited. I have Ken Coscia, an international Silva instructor, and we're going to go deep on the Silva Method, sort of its origins and background, and his own personal experiences in teaching the Silva Method. I love the Silva Method. This goes all the way back. I remember getting that old paperback from the old days, the old Silva mind control method. And these seemingly, that's the one, that's these seemingly simple methods that allowed me to change my brain waves, that made what I later understood to be certain kinds of meditation very easy. And I've experienced miracles and wonders, subjective communication with others, and changed patterns and habits and relationships. It is a mind-blowing sort of way of understanding your consciousness. And it's wonderful to have an instructor. People have watched my podcast. We've talked about a little this through Dr. Robert Stone's work on the Silva Method. And so now we have Ken Coscia. Welcome to the Reality Revolution, Ken.
Thank you, Brian. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excited. This is my favorite topic. And I'm thrilled to hear you say what you're saying about it and how it's helped you, the tools have helped you in your life.
Well, tell me a little bit more about your journey to Silva, how you were first introduced to it, and how you decided to make this your primary mission.
Yeah, it's funny in looking at some of the work you do and people you interview about synchronicities. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and I was being groomed to be an engineer. If you ask me why, truth be told, my sister's boyfriend, his best friend was an engineer, and I worshiped the guy. They're older than me. Well, it was good for him. Plus, I was good in math, supposedly. So here I am at Boston University. They're known for having a very small engineering school, and I'm failing. I'm flunking out. And I went from being a jock, an athlete, a long distance runner. I was interviewed by Penn State for a scholarship, although I didn't make it. So it's funny how life changes, moves around. I finished 1 year and I was on academic probation. I came back the second year, and I'm not a quitter. I'm very persistent, but it was like a living hell. So I'm feeling really disappointed and discouraged, if you might say. So after 2 weeks of that, I quit engineering, although I was told, oh, no, this is for you. You can do it. You've got the aptitude. And I changed to business administration. Much easier curriculum. And yet I went from a 181 to a 2.0, which is going from D- to about a D+, C-, something like that. And I noticed you froze on the screen again.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm still, keep going, it's okay?
Yeah.
I had technical glitches yesterday too. I did a Facebook Live with a dear friend. It's God bless technology.
We got it figured out.
Yeah, it helps us. Anyway, so as I was saying, what's interesting for me is I came home, it's a spring break, it's the middle of May, and my childhood friend who I would normally be with, we hung out together. He said, oh, we're going to do something different tomorrow. We're going to go hear about mind control. We used to be called Silva Mind Control.
Right.
And I said, what? I was born and raised in a Roman Catholic, very dogmatic background in our history where there was a pope, cardinal. My cousin I was his altar boy. He was a bishop, a missionary in Brazil, Franciscan, and he was ordained in St. Patrick's Cathedral. So I tell you that because this is completely out of anything I had ever heard of. I mean, we didn't even talk about astrology or just period. So I really went along for the ride because his sister was dating the instructor. This is in Brooklyn, and we were going to help fill up the room. It was so new then. This is 1971.
Right.
When, people kind of looked at you like this. But he got me about the memory thing, and he was just ranting. And so truth be told, full disclosure, if it's okay to be straightforward, my hair was the middle of my back. I was a wannabe hippie, if you will, middle-class hippie, I guess you'd call me. We arrived 45 minutes late, and all I will say is that I was there physically, but mentally I was on another planet. And we sat in the back of the room at a round table. The room was packed, by the way, 128 people. And we laughed and giggled. I didn't really take it seriously. It was, again, supporting his sister, and happened to be
Right.
Barbara, which is my wife's. But something happened. The guy kept talking. His name was Bill Zarek. He's now a monk, studying with Guru Mahi, who took over for Muktananda in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he was my instructor, introduced. But something happened in the middle of it. All of a sudden, I woke up and I was like laser focused on him. And I'm very kinesthetic even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And kinesthetically, it was like a magnet, something drawing me in. And I felt like, yes, I want this. This is, and then that spooked me, frankly. It's like, but why?
Yeah.
I was the last person to leave. I was full of questions. I'm known for asking a lot of questions. And he sent me to the library, and I'm checking him out at the library. And everything he said seemed to be true. I found, all the resources that he referred to, the research then, like in biofeedback and whatnot. I said, whoa. So I brought up to my mom and dad. If you could picture this, we're sitting at the table, my mom and dad. My dad had 2 games on. My dad was a professional gambler. He had the 2 radios on. He had the TV on with the other game, seemingly not paying attention. My mom and I, when I mentioned this course called Silva Mind Control, my mom turned white as a ghost. She took out her rosary beads and started praying for me. And when I mentioned the fee, my dad all of a sudden woke up and looked at me, and you can guess what he said. And I won't repeat it. He basically said, no effing way. I mean, really, like, I thought he was going to punch my lights out. Now I really wanted it even more. So I'm on the phone, almost in, or kidding aside, almost in tears with the instructor. And this guy was such a saint, still is. And Bill said, let's not let money get in the way, Ken. This is too important. Turned out I needed a summer job. I didn't have one yet. He needed help in his office. So that's how I got into the class. 3 days later, I brought my at the time, my high school sweetheart was away with her dad. She came home. She came in with me, my buddy Frank and his girlfriend. And it's like I never looked back. But here I am sitting in the class, going through it. And you mentioned before about the meditations. We didn't use the term so openly, meditation, like we do now because of all the research. And sitting next to me is a stockbroker from Wall Street, Raul Morales. And Raul, when we did the long relax, if you've done that, that big relax that marketing people call centering, but the real deal is the long relax, by the way. He looked, we're done. And he said, whoa. He said, my whole body was tingling and his toes. And he said, I saw all these colors. And I looked at him and was like, I would have been happy. I made the mistake comparing it. My little pinky. All that happened to me was I closed my eyes. I wouldn't say I was bored, but nothing happened. You know what I mean? Right. I just kind of sat there, still patient. But I admit I was worried. Am I doing it right? Is it okay? Am I deep enough? What's he talking about? Which I now understand was the problem. I was being too critical of my thinking. And so the instructor taught me a lesson. If anybody listening, here's a little takeaway. If you're reading any of the Silva books or you're a Silva practitioner, you got to stop asking that question. The real question is, what do you want from it? How do you want to use it? I was trying too hard. He said, Ken, just do what we tell you. Just, follow the instructions. I mean, it really is that simple.
Right.
And then tell yourself, bingo, we call it level. I'm at my alpha level, whatever that means. He didn't tell me, but
yeah, this is the first time that they're really looking at biofeedback for brainwaves in a very controlled environment using these techniques, which is why it's so fascinating to me. We obviously knew of this information thousands of years ago, but we really started to look, how can we change our brainwave from beta to alpha to begin with? And this was really one of the first I can find where it was not some mamby-pamby thing. It was, this is what you do. You sit down, you roll your eyes at a 45-degree angle, and it came from solid research, and it was so helpful to say, this is not complicated. This is all you got to do, for a couple of minutes, just roll your eyes up. And I could feel it. I could feel my brain slow down. I could feel like an openness start to happen. It was the first time in my life where I felt like, okay, I can change my consciousness. And another thing that Silva started to use, the integration of the eye movement with consciousness, almost like their eyes are a joystick to the soul. I know that later on,
Exactly.
as Silva becomes more advanced, they start integrating some of the NLP stuff and really accessing visualization methods and stuff. Some people, some aspects of Silva did, but
Right.
um, I found that to be very interesting. You know, initial part of the Silva method.
Yeah. In fact, you said a lot in that. By the way, Brian, I want to just say you are such a curious learner. You seem so playful, and to listen to you speak, I mean, and that's what it takes, by the way, folks, just to have an open mind, an open heart, and say, I'm here. And the point of my story was he taught me about surrendering. I let go. I stopped
Right.
worrying about it. And as soon as I did, I went from critical thinking, which has to do with logic and reasoning, which in terms of brainwave expression, we would liken that to when you're wide awake and alert and beta, to
Right.
alter your consciousness, which is what you're doing, to lower brain waves, just like we do very naturally when we sleep. It takes being in a subjective state where you surrender and you're not rational. There's no rational thought. There's no logic. There's no reasoning. If you even start to question, you're going to lose it.
Right.
And it's an art. And what Jose did. So by the way, once I did that, then things started happening for me.
Right.
And I suffered from headaches. I stopped getting headaches. I was able to control them without drugs. I went back to school and I'm studying less. And my grade point average went up to 3.0, which is a B+. And I'm studying using what we call the
Right.
3 fingers technique. And then and I met Jose in Boston. And the people in New England were the people who put Silva on the map. I'm so blessed, so fortunate. Although they were more business oriented and they didn't stay because that was their prime intention. I mean, they wanted to help, and help
Right.
humanity. But to do this work, you got to have the prime intention of being on a mission, and and it happens to be a business versus a business with a mission. I just read that quote that somebody made. It slipped my mind who it was, and I love it with respect to that. But the point is, I was grandfathered by Jose. For some reason, I have a funny picture of me with my ponytail and a sport jacket, and Jose with this funny look on his face. And I became the youngest instructor in the US for sure, possibly the world. I was 19. And Harry McKnight was one of our earliest instructors, took a liking to me, and he was doing advanced training. And I met these guys, and because I was following them around everywhere they went while I was a student. And because I was a student and I didn't have the money and I couldn't leave school, they grandfathered me. So I'm teaching full time in Boston at night and on the weekends, during the day student. And then I came to Connecticut in 74 with that. So, again, I've never looked back. 50 years this year. But to go back to what you said, if you don't mind, I mean, I don't mean to hog.
No,
it's hard to quiet. I love this top. I mean, I realize I've been living in kind of a bubble, I admit, in doing these classes in person. I've never had, quote, a real job, but I'm surrounded by people like you, Brian, who are kind enough to interview me, who really want to make a difference, who want to help, humanity to evolve. And that's very different than the status quo, as we all know.
Very much, yeah. Well,
the old man, the chief, we used to call him, Jose, he liked to be called the chief. He was a very proud man. He always walked like this. And in his early years, when I met him, his English, it was pretty good, but he had a thicker accent, and it improved as time went by.
Right.
But he basically studied wisdom schools. He was a Rosicrucian. That's not in any of the books, I don't think, by the way. But fact, he was a Rosicrucian, went to the highest level. Also, he studied wisdom schools. He studied the Bible. He studied different world religions, and he looked for common denominators. That was his research. You mentioned NLP. My understanding is Silva came way before NLP.
Right, way before.
Bandler and Grinder studied Milton Erickson. Jose got permission to use the hand levitation, which we teach in the Silva program, and it's Ericksonian hypnosis. It goes back to him. He used him as a model of excellence, and he studied people like that to look for common denominators. And he would be the first, if he were here, he'd say, Brian, I didn't do anything new. What he did that was new was he organized it, he structured it, and simplified it. And the research was primarily with the children. His children and neighbors' children. He worked with thousands before he actually went public, just testing, looking for results. And biofeedback played a part in I would say in the late 60s into the 70s, all the research grants went to biofeedback. So it was a big deal. And we had a leading researcher who was a migraine specialist, Dr. Richard McKen. I knew all these guys, by the way. I mean, they're all much older than me. I was the kid on the block. Now I'm the senior guy. It's a weird experience, but I turned 70 this year and I still don't feel that way. I still feel like I'm.
You look 50, so.
Well, thanks. My wife would say sometimes I act like I'm 12.
My wife too.
Well, that's because, you know, when you're playful, you're playful.
Right.
And so it keeps you young. But he kind of organized and he structured that looking for results. Nowadays, I get coached by if you're familiar with Dr. Andrew Newberg's work, his partner is Mark Robert Waldman. They're the authors. He's a good guy for you to he's very science-based, though.
Okay.
He's very strict. I mean, he is off the wall strict.
Right.
But I like it. And we become friendly. And today they're saying that brain scans are far more, what should I say, reliable, because the brain is so sophisticated that even with advanced technology and computers, they can't keep up with it.
Right.
So my point is, Jose was very much a visionary. He was very intuitive and he was very much ahead of the times. And he was criticized. I mean, he was criticized by so many individuals, you know, for his work. I mean, you want to hear some funny Jose stories?
Of course. Yes.
This is in our early days. McCullough Corporate, Dr. Hahn, Wilfred Hahn, who there was a subsidiary of McCullough Corporation, which had nothing to do with this work, the Mind Science Foundation, and they were based in Texas. He became friends with Jose. He helped Jose because Jose's research was in hypnosis and meditation, and he married the two together. And he had a lot of, you know, like what now they call positive psychology, and then wisdom teaching and so on. But Dr. Hahn opened the doors to during the day, a lot of the leading scientists like Dr. Barbara Brown. Back then, she wrote the book New Body, New Mind. She was a leading biofeedback researcher. And I mean, there's a whole host of them. So he invited him to give a talk to groups like this and then academics. So Jose shows up wherever this talk was, and Dr. Hahn looked and said, "Jose, where are your notes?" He said, "You know me, I don't need notes. I know what I want to say." He was never scripted. I've learned from him. I mean, you know, I have a bullet points, what I want to say in general, but I'd rather not, even in my classes, there's a structure. So Dr. Hahn said, you can't go before academics like this without notes. They won't even listen to you. So he gave him an empty file folder. It wasn't a book, but a folder. And he said, here, take this, put it under your arm. When they introduce you, walk up, these are your notes. And be very careful to very meticulously put them down on the podium that you'll be behind. And he did. And those were and he never even glanced at them.
Right.
And his whole life was like that. I mean, just being criticized. At one time, his wife wouldn't speak to him. She thought he was doing works of the devil. You know, the local pastor, not the Catholic Church, the local pastor, Monsignor, was upset, you know, about him. Even though Jose was a big contributor, you know, they believed in tithing, you know, to the church. He would go every Sunday with the family, because, you know, when people are insecure in their own thinking, or if they don't understand, you know, this, people fear what they don't understand. And that's why I kind of wish he were alive today, because so much of what he was ahead in the times, they're now documenting. Right. I mean, I tend to be very science-based, and I'm very conservative as a presenter, and which is maybe why I've lasted. I mean, I'm the guy Jose picked, by the way, in '84. I have such love in my heart for him and appreciation, because I've always been consistent producer, if you want to call it that, and active. And we were expanding. We were like in 111 countries. And Harry McKnight and Dr. Wilfred, and not Dr. Hahn, Dr. George Dessau, who was a clinical psychologist, were going to go to Switzerland and do some business projects for Silva. So they needed a replacement. There were only 4 people in the world. Jose was one of them, and I got the call. I'll always remember that. And by the way, now I can, yeah, I got the call. But back then I said, why me? I mean, I kind of freaked out for a while. You know, and then I recovered, and I must have spent hundreds of hours. And I got to tell you this, because you are so cool. This book, that he talks about, like the Business Manager's book by Jose Silva and Robert
Right.
Stone. Dr. Stone, I knew him personally, wrote over 85 books of metaphysics.
Mhm.
And this man was kind of like much older than me. He was a contemporary of Jose's. I'll always remember this. Harry McKnight, who everyone adored, he was my mentor. I'm the trainer of trainers now. I'm the training director for Silva. He was my training director with Nelda Sheets and Jim Needham.
Mhm.
Harry was going to Switzerland, but he was scheduled to go to Hawaii, Honolulu, to do an advanced course. Remember, I got the call. So I got the call from Harry, said, you got to go in and fill in for me.
Right.
Well, this is before emails and cell phones. And Robert Stone was world renowned, presenting all over the world, and scientists knew him. He was such a cool guy. And they couldn't find him. They didn't know where he was.
Right.
So here I am making the trip to Hawaii from Connecticut with my wife, and I'm studying, preparing. I arrive in Honolulu. I'm checked in. There was somebody there who was studying with him, took care of us. He still doesn't know I'm there. He arrives the day before the seminar is scheduled, and they tell him, Harry McKnight won't be here. And Harry and he were close friends. He loved
Right.
him. And here's this kid, Ken Coscia, coming in. This guy was so welcoming. Some people, when people are in their head, very egotistical, I'm sure we've all met the type like that.
Yeah.
He was so humble.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what to expect. It's like, who am I? I can't even light a match to Harry McKnight, in my opinion. But he was so welcoming. He was so genuine. We went out to lunch. You'd never know it. Unless he was hiding it, but I could tell. He was warm and inviting. He encouraged, which was great. You got to encourage a speaker. And the way he introduced me, you would think it was the second coming of some avatar.
Right.
He talked about this rising star. I'll always remember that. He made it so easy for me to do my job.
Mm-hmm.
We had a wonderful time. And I'll always remember that, people in your life who kind of champion you, if you will. They see something in you and they encourage you when you're full of self-doubt. Because I admit to you, even in my early years as a Silva instructor, I had a lot of self-doubt, if you will, and questioning. I still question myself, but now I more question myself, how can I do better? How can I add more value? It's like, it's hard to say, but I never really feel satisfied. I feel like doing this work is a work of art, and it's sometimes challenging to really connect deep with people. Mm-hmm. Because it's not the information. But it's a great
opportunity too, isn't it? You get to see people flower, change, and give the opportunity to be there, right? So I get the impression that Jose Silva, you imagine this spiritual guru, and he's the total opposite of what you would expect in meeting somebody like a Jose Silva, who, when I've read all of his books and heard his voice and this, I would be like, please, he sounds like when I read the book about him, he's a businessman, and like a friend, somebody that you could just sit and shoot the S with all day long, right? Somebody like that.
Yeah, yes and no. I say that because he was very serious.
Very serious.
And as he got in his older years, he started getting a little more humorous, and he would tell jokes and he'd loosen up. When he would come, I remember he was going to be in Springfield, Massachusetts, and there was an instructor there and myself, and we were co-sponsoring Jose. So we're finished, and it's time to do bookkeeping. We have to, give the share report to him, what the expenses were. Right. No big deal, but it's important. There's a business side.
Right.
And the guy's name was Charlie. He was so funny. He said, let's get Jose, let's keep buying beer for him. See if we can get him feeling really good. And he'd be really generous. It was the funniest thing. And he didn't. He didn't miss a pace. And I'm sure he saw through Charlie's. But he made that effort. But he used to complain to us in a loving way. He said, you guys, meaning us instructors, are taking too many coffee breaks in your life because we got a job to do. Humanity is really suffering and struggling. He was really very serious on a mission that we had to help humanity evolve. And he complained. And I'm convinced he passed away in his 80s, mid 80s. People say, why, he's human, right?
Right.
And that's beside the point. But I'm convinced personally that it's not that he was abusive. His self-care was minimal because he was constantly on the go. I mean, he would go overseas to Latin America and he'd finish a 2-day training, and it's intense. It's very demanding.
Right,
And
right.
he's working with a translator and he's going nonstop. And then he arrives on the scene and he's on TV shows and radio shows and he's being interviewed. And then he finishes, they do their bookkeeping, whatever. And then the next morning he's going over the mountain to another part of Venezuela to give another presentation. It was like nonstop, and he'd come back.
Right.
And anyway, that's just my little do that. But he I remember we were in Texas, and at the time we were doing an instructor training in Laredo, and he invited me to lunch, and I thought there were going to be a group of directors,
Right.
at lunch, and it was just me and him. And then I knew, oh God, I'm in trouble. That was his way. And he wasn't direct though, he wasn't really direct, but he indirectly said things to me and talked about other people who we knew, who used to work with us.
Right.
And it was his way of telling me he was concerned about what I was doing. I wasn't doing anything bad or terrible.
Right.
I was just, I always remember that. It was just funny. It was, that was his way. And I said, okay, Chief, I know. And he loved being called. And by the way, what you said before about shooting the breeze with him, in the early days, we go to Texas for 2 weeks and we'd have instructor certification.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and this is during the time when myself and Laura Silva Quesada and we bring in a guest, and we were doing these trainings. And then we'd finish up, we'd have a day off, and then we'd have 2 days of a convention. But usually on one of the days, we'd have an afternoon off and we go to the ranch out in the desert somewhere. The Silva family, they no longer have it, but had a ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Jose. You can picture him wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and wearing a 6-shooter, like you see in the cowboy movies. But he had it, and we'd look and we'd laugh and say, Jose, what's that for? Because on the ranch, it was very prevalent rattlesnakes.
Ah.
So there was danger on the ranch, that where they were, it was very, very common. So he had that there because they had some, I don't know, there were things that they had there. They had some view sites and so on. I'm a guy from Brooklyn. I don't know much about that, but I remember that. And there he is sitting there, and so yeah, you're right. He'd love to chat and celebrate that. And his wife would have this big party at her home, and we get together. And what was cool about that was be from people all over the world, instructors sharing this vision of bringing this methodology. And what you said before about watching people bloom,
Mm-hmm.
people often ask me, don't you ever get bored, Ken? Because I follow the program we have is structured and it's been researched, and I honor that. And part of my job is to encourage and certify people to do the same. Now, when we're doing other things, of course, I expand on ideas. Of course, I look at other things. And so, but when I'm teaching the class, I feel I have a responsibility. This is what people are contracting for. They want to learn the Silva Method as Jose created it and developed it. And that's what I teach. So I don't relate to the material in the same way.
Right.
But I always tell people I would be bored, silly, except once I get in the group, like you said, that's what comes to life. So
Right.
I send people a questionnaire before the class. I only allow up to 24 people so that everyone's a VIP. And I love when they call me and we talk on the phone, look at what their goals are to make sure it's a good fit for them. So then I begin the class and I feel like I'm with, I can't call them friends, but we're friendly.
Right.
We know each other and I have an interest. And that, you're right, it brings it to life because I'm watching people who are sickly looking. They're recovering from chemotherapy or
Mhm.
surgery. And sometimes I say, are you sure you're okay that you can, it's fun and we're doing a lot of meditation and it helps, but it's still demanding because you're doing inner work. Oh no, I want to be there.
Right.
And I say, if you're not able to, that's okay. I'll work with you. You go at your pace. These people, by the time we get to the third or fourth day, they've got more color, they look healthier,
Mhm.
and they've rebounded. People have come in with pain, the pain is gone. It's not magic. We're teaching them how to boost their immune system. We're getting them into a new state of being that now we know they're centered, they're balanced, they're in homeostasis, as medical people would call it, meaning all systems go and the body's doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
Even
So
the eyes, I'm sorry, go.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. You were saying even
I'm
the
just going to
eyes.
say at the 45-degree angle,
Right.
Part of what Jose did was he studied nature. He studied what he knew. He wasn't a doctor. He never went to school a day in his life.
Right.
But as he studied different things, if you ever watch a doctor show, a medical show, you always look to see where the eyes are. And what he found was not 45, but 20 degrees is a natural resting position for the eyes. There are muscles around each of the eyeballs. And when they're relaxed, for example, when your eyes are open, if you defocus your vision, you'll go into what some call a trance, or your brain waves will lower. It's not easy for people to do that, perhaps, but if you close your eyes, that's why when people pray, when people meditate, when people do all these techniques that are out there now, the easiest thing is close your eyes, because naturally when you close your eyes, the brain waves slow down. And then if you turn them up, that 45-degree angle, and you only think of it like a light switch, you don't have to hold them.
Right.
Let's just clarify. It naturally, without anything else, turns on lower brain waves. It puts you into that state. And then if you add, although Jose didn't in his books talk about, he just said, take a deep breath. But now we know slow, deep belly breathing helps the brain chemistry to change to support what we're doing. It puts us into that state. It's the beginning of taking control. So this is what he did. He looked at that and he just kind of tested it on, we affectionately call the children his guinea pigs.
Right. It's perfect. And the system is designed to adapt, and as knowledge is gained. And so it's not frozen in, the 1970s method. It's growing and adapting. And there's been other adaptations. I wanted to talk to you about that. So it appears from Robert Stone's writing that he starts talking a little bit more about the left-right brain model a little bit, and kind of activating that right brain as a part of the process beyond just going to alpha. And so it appeared that you started integrating that a little bit more into teachings as you go along. And so tell me a little more about some of the evolutions that have occurred with the Silva method. As people have used it and gotten better at it, it's gotten to be more advanced in some ways.
Absolutely.
So what since you started in the 70s to now, what sort of advancements have you made as people have applied this method?
Like you said, so well put, Brian, it has been evolving. To go back to this right brain, left brain, Jose was a big proponent. In any books written by him, even co-authored, he talked about right brain, left brain. I'm not 100% comfortable talking about it because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a brain scientist. And I'd like to be science-based and bring them on board, because there are differences of opinion depending on who you read, who you study in neuroscience. So what more so you would find is we're talking more about whole brain functioning, using whole brain, which is the case with that. So typically what we do know for fact is what traditionally was referred to as left brain thinking, logic, reasoning, rational thought, objective communication, verbal communication, critical thinking skills. That is fact, objective mode of consciousness. In terms of communication, it would be called objective communication. Fact, what we call subjective mode of consciousness. There's no rational mind, there's no critical thinking, there's no logic, there's no reasoning. It's nonverbal, it's intuitive, it's creativity is here. It's but now in quantum physics, might say is non-local.
Right.
There's no sense of time. It's just a state of being, if you will. And as soon as we introduce any kind of worry or fear, we're out of it. Or any kind of critical thinking, we're out of it. And that traditionally was considered right brain thinking. It may still be true, accurate. I mean, I couldn't honestly debate it. And it's not important, because we know that we have these two aspects. And the mission of Silva is to integrate the two so that we can be more effective in problem solving and more creative. And now probably I'm going to guess you've read Stealing Fire.
No, I haven't read.
I think you might find that helpful, because in the book, there are some people in the 70s I studied with, like John Lilly. John Lilly is the man who developed, well, they talk about him, and I never knew what happened to him.
Yeah, what did he? I know he was studying dolphins and communicating with dolphins for a while.
Well, he was just like the remote viewers. I have the original report on remote viewing with Ingo Swann and
Right.
Targ and Puthoff. They want, and as you know, it went for 20 years. The CIA took it over, and they were looking to weaponize it to, during the Cold War. That's what happened to John Lilly. And the backstory is he left. He disappeared. He got off the grid because he didn't want to work with them. He didn't want to weaponize his work. And I mean, I was a kid. Now I look back and say, oh my God, I studied with this man. Back then it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I remember with the tanks, those original tanks, I floated in some of those original tanks. And now I just had a float session the other day. I was telling the people with it, and they thought I was so cool because I studied with Lilly, and and he wasn't a personal friend. I just was in with 100 other people. But this book, Stealing Fire, gives you a lot of backstory of things that are going on that mainstream doesn't report.
Right.
The Green Berets are studying how to alter their consciousness to make quicker decisions. It's really exciting. There's a lot of research studying psilocybin and hallucinogens and mushrooms, not recreationally, but how it helps alter the consciousness to help us understand the inner workings of the subconscious.
Right.
And so they're putting a lot of pieces together. Jose didn't do that kind of work, but he did look at that. He did look at that aspect. And what he was concerned about was control, being able to turn it on, turn it off at will. He studied some of the famous psychics like Peter Herkos and others that people today wouldn't even know those names. They go way back. Edgar Cayce was a model of excellence for him, especially as a humanitarian. And Edgar Cayce was a kinesthetic, but he lacked conscious awareness. He would go into this state, and when he came out, he remembered nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
And so what we're teaching people, I don't know that people are going to be as tuned in as Edgar Cayce. I mean, this guy was awesome, beyond awesome, but they have more control. And that was Jose's thing, because he thought if people lack control, they're going to get spooked. I remember in the early days. So in answer to your question, what's evolved is how we can explain it and put people at ease. And that's been kind of part of a personal mission. I've been the go-to guy with the work with intuition, because in the early days, we did this thing called case studies. It's subjective communication. So picture this. Let's say Brian and I were doing this. Brian, I close my eyes and Brian gives me the name of somebody he's concerned about. Now they call it medical intuition. Jose's children were the first medical intuitives, but they didn't call it that. So I do my thing. I'm in my alpha state, and I imagine this person, and I imagine what could be wrong with this person. And I tell Brian, and Brian is saying, yes, oh, not so much, no, yeah. And people do this to this. We've never found anybody who can't do it. And it's not 100%. Nobody's 100%. But people, they knock their socks off. They're 80% accurate consistently, 30 foot, way beyond statistic of guess. And then our interest is, can we use that to then maybe work our business that way, to get information? Can I help it to understand my spouse better, to understand my client or my patient, so I could connect better and help them? Could I use this to, if someone was in sales, to help my potential customers understand what I have to offer to make sure we're a good fit? I mean, that's where he was. It wasn't about being psychic, like psychic whoopee.
Right.
We're great believers in absent healing and what some call remote healing now, or distant healing. So Jose was I kind of went a little bit off there. Jose was developing this as a tool to awaken the ability so that people could turn it on. But in the early days, this is my point, people would do this case working 10 times. And they go, let's say I'm the instructor. Oh my God, Ken, I can't believe I did that. I just do what I did. Pinch me. And I'd say, yes, it's awesome, isn't it? It never gets old. But then you know what? They'd say, but do I have to do it again? I mean, truth be told, I'm just straight, full disclosure, they'd freak out.
Yeah.
And they would leave because
There's
they didn't know
fear.
what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I recognized that. And it's funny, I had a synchronicity. When I started traveling the world, I heard from other instructors, and I had more and more contact with, through instructors, millions of graduates. And this is very prominent. If anyone tells the truth, in the early days. So I started playing with this and researching a lot of intuitives, and I became a member of Institute of Noetic Sciences to look what they were doing, and anything I could to kind of fine tune it. And I put together a workshop called The Lost Sense or Intuition in You. And
Mm.
it builds on the foundation. It doesn't go deeper, frankly. I think this course is incredible, but it builds on it in a way to make it more practical, to help them develop applications and be more comfortable and more at ease, to see some similarities, if you will,
Right.
some common denominator. I called up Jose to get his permission, and his daughter, Ana Martinez, was in charge at the time. I said, hey, Ana, Ken here. I want to talk to the chief and his brother Juan. He was the international director. I've got this idea. And I told her. She said, Ken, you're kidding. We just finished a meeting, concerned about this, wanted to come up with something that would help people stop freaking out over the caseworking. And here I was with the idea. I love it. It was like, so needless to say, I got the approval, the green light.
Mm-hmm.
My whole life with them has been like that. It's just kind of being on the same wavelength, if you
Right.
will. And with that, so that's a big part of the evolution that instructors are learning. They go through a lot of training and reading, and I shout out to fellow instructors. I hope they continue. I feel like the more I know, the less I know.
Right.
So that we can help people connect the dots and recognize the similarities. So in I'll continue. I'll just say it this way. We've had our ups and downs. It's
Right.
a family-run business. Anybody who's been following us knows it's not hard to tell, although it's a family-run business.
Right.
And there have been differences of opinion. I have
Of course,
outlived all the
yeah.
family members, by the way, in terms of running. I'm the only consistent person who's ever left, including
wonderful.
family member. It is. But here's the point. There were ups and downs, and Jose, just before he passed, created, he was experimenting with the subjective communication.
Right.
He wanted to see if we could eliminate the foundation, the first 2 days of the training, and just skip immediately to day 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And he called it Ultramind ESP.
I've read that and listened to that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good program.
It
Jose
is.
created. It's almost identical to what we used to call the basic lecture series, but without the first 2 days that, in my humble opinion, are necessary for grounding people. Because if people
Right.
are suffering, they can't sleep. If people are stressed out, they go into fear and they're going to lose it. They're not going to alter their consciousness.
Right.
If people are in pain, it's a distraction. If people have horrible relationships or can't pay their bills and they don't know how to create a conscious business, I'll put it that way, that's going to get in the way of them in their
Always.
personal evolution. Yeah, exactly. And that's why. But what happened was Jose took ill, he passed away, and family members, there are different reasons why that I'm not going to go into, ran with it. And it's okay, they're legal, and they're doing it separately. But in the summer of 2006, the family got together in a spirit of harmony, first time in a long while.
Mm-hmm.
And they admitted, they said, hey, we got to protect our dad's legacy. This isn't right. We're kind of not honoring our students. It was a wonderful period, and we had a renaissance.
Right.
And for about less than 10 years, Laura Silva Quesada, who came in the early 80s, I was one of her mentors. She
Mhm.
often thanked me as, not that, I don't know if I call her mentor, but she modeled me because I was, 10 or 11 years, 13 years, whatever, before her. And there was another instructor, Paul Grievous, before he passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we became close, and Jose made her director of instructor training. Then she left for about 10 years. They brought her back in. And then in that spirit of harmony, we looked at the program and took some of Jose's advanced material about source energy, about divine guidance and having a guided life. Things that we usually only talked about in graduate work. We don't have a lot of upselling in Silva, I'm happy to say.
Right.
We have a few graduate programs where we build on the foundation applications. So we took some of Jose's material that he often only spoke of with his instructors, and we integrated it into what we used to call the basic lecture series. And then some marketing people who used to work with us closely, Mind Valley, rebranded, and they were advising us because we're not marketing people.
Right.
I stink as a marketer. I just copy a model and hopefully I reach people. And we created names Silva Life System, which would be the first 2 days, and Silva Intuition System. I only do it 4 days. It's what we call the immersion of it.
Mm-hmm.
And people from back 30, 40, 50 years ago, even 20, prior to 2007, when we went public, love it. They're in tears sometimes. because we kind of up the ante. Like, for example, when we use Mirror the Mind, though you're listening, and even if you're not a Silva grad, or if I can just plug this book, it's a great book to read. It's written in the early 70s, but it'll give you great value. If you
Right.
follow the directions, you'll get great value. Maybe you want to take the training. I hope you do. I think you'll get even more. That's beside the point. But with Mirror the Mind, the idea is you first identify the problem, the current reality, the way things have been. Then you don't want to wallow in it. You don't want to make it worse. You acknowledge it, take responsibility, you kind of eliminate it from your thoughts, and then you focus on the end result, the outcome,
Right.
without question. What is you want? Well, now we're teaching people still Mirror the Mind, and how you can, when you're ready for it, advance that and connect with source. Some people say God, with nature, the universe, energy, in a way that you are more consciously guided to the right actions to take, the right behaviors, the right steps to trust.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, if you want to call it that. And so that's been part of what I started traveling the world. In most countries, not all, frankly, almost all upgraded to what we call Silva Life and Intuition System.
Right.
But
I wanted
that's their
to,
choice.
before we ran out of
Anyway.
time,
Yeah,
talk
sorry.
about subjective communication a little bit more. I remember when I first was exposed to this at a very young age. I think I had a second job interview, and I tried it. I went into alpha. I programmed myself who I was going to be interviewing, and I told myself, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I knew I had woken up, and I sent my message, imagined a communication with this person that I was interviewing, and I had the best interview. It was very unlikely that I would have a good interview with this person, and I was sold on it, and I used it for to meet girlfriends and have business relationships, and just all around with my parents, a way of psychically communicating. It took me to another level where I was really meeting a real powerful aspect of this person. Oftentimes they wouldn't remember that I had communicated with them. Sometimes it felt like they did.
Yeah.
And so to do this, and you've had some success stories where people have communicated. I wanted to, if you could tell me more about some stories people have told about these subjective communications. They're real. People still don't believe that this stuff really works and that you can psychically communicate using a particular process. The reason I think it was so powerful, the Silva Method allows your brain waves to sync together. I think what happens when we subjectively communicate all the time, but I might be in theta and that person might be in beta. And it's like, we're just not going to, our brain waves are not going to allow us to truly subjectively communicate. And so this kind of gives us a way for us to, we put out the call, and once the call is answered, we can lock together and communicate. You do give a warning so that the people can't use it in a manipulatory or evil or negative fashion, which is great. I think that people could be drawn to it. Oh, I can use this to manipulate and control people. But I wanted to get your story of, you've heard stories of your students using this technique. Tell me a little more about that.
Oh, it's fun listening to you. You're so open, man. This is incredible. Just let me back step a little bit. What Brian's referring to, but the subjective communication, if we turn the clocks back a couple of decades, this would be woo-woo we'd hear from the scientists. Big time. I don't have permission to use the man's name. He's a prominent neuroscience researcher, and he works with the best of the best with brain scans.
Mm-hmm.
And in teaching compassionate communication courses, if you check what they call, what psychologists call compassionate communications, they are now teaching what Brian just described.
Right.
And I laughed, and I was following him on Facebook, and I was this close to saying, by the way, because he's a buddy, woo-woo this. We've been teaching that for more than 50 years. He's telling people, here's how you do it. Before you have a delicate conversation with somebody, and you want to connect, for whatever the reason may be, personal, business, whatever, is what Brian said about synchronizing. This happens when people are on the same wavelength. You don't need to know anything about beta, alpha. You need to have a machine to tell you for sure. But there's a natural synchronizing. There's been, that I know of, at least for the past 50 years, when Brainwave first started, they find that husbands and wives close friends, people care about each other, are synchronized, so to speak. And that even though they were thousands of miles away, if they said to their friend who's the other one, something about them being upset and something happened to them, something terrible, they lied, both people would show elevated blood pressure, elevated signs of tension, even though one had no clue about that. So my point, guys, is what science is showing is we're always connected like that. The goal is conscious. So what you can do is at night when you go to sleep is an easy time. This is what people have told me. Graduates said, Ken, the more I talk to my sons about smoking and the dangers of smoking, the more they smoke. Any parent can relate to that.
Right.
So I finally shut up and stopped, and I'd invite them into my awareness. We call it the laboratory level. So I'm in my office state at night before bed, and I'm imagining my son, and I just expressed to him, I love you, I care deeply, I'm concerned. Not to manipulate, but to hopefully them see the truth of it, the risk. I care. I've noticed you're coughing more. It's expensive. It's a serious habit, and the dangers, the risk to your health. And I just pray to God or whatever that you'll find a reason to stop. Never say anything that they did this. And then the person's away on a business trip, he told me, and he's on the phone with his wife, and his wife said, I just heard from our son, and he just had his last cigarette, he said.
Right.
And he's like, yes. And those kinds of things. I live in Connecticut. So I teach Silva when we're in person in Chicago and in Connecticut, here in Farmington, Connecticut. In fact, you can find me easy, Silva Method of Connecticut. I also go into Boston. But I get to travel around the world and, do a lot of these different things with people. And the distance doesn't matter, with that. So one of the things in Hartford, Connecticut, very conservative, we have the oldest newspaper. There's just starting wellness centers. And I had done a favor for a big fitness group that were just going to start partnering with the hospitals, the local hospitals. Long story short, I wanted to get in there and do some, at least not Silva courses, but introductions.
Right.
And they're very conservative and they're very, doctor. So I did this myself, and I'm sitting at my level at night before bed, or actually before going to sleep. And I'm imagining the person. I didn't know what she looked like, but I knew the name. So I imagined her as if they're at me. And I just said, you can trust me, you can count on me. This is an incredible set of tools. People love it. They get value. We're working with people. And I'm talking like that, right? So then I prepared objectively and I had all these books and references, and I had my briefcase loaded. And I came back, and I think I even put a tie and a jacket on. I go in, to the hospital, into her office, ready to give her all my data. And she looked at me. We said hello, a couple of niceties. She said, okay, Ken, when do you want to start?
Right.
I was so disappointed. I wanted to at least produce some of my data.
Right.
She didn't care. It was like she knew all this already. It was wild. And I said, okay. And we set up a schedule. And that's the kind of thing. And people, I hear this all the time from people in sales or in relationships, connecting that, or therapists or coaches. Oh, there's so many coaches today. We need more and more, don't we, to help people. And they'll just imagine the person with them is like we are now. Let's say if we're doing Zoom, having a conversation and connecting, and the person being open and listening. That's all it takes. And I would say this is, it's our belief. People might say, yeah, well, I don't know if I believe that you can't do harm. Then I would say this to you, even if that were true, I don't think it is, you better get your act together and learn these skills so that you protect yourself.
True. But
That's
you
part
also
of where I'm
build in
coming
some
from.
commands in some of the Silva work where you say, if you plan on doing this to harm anyone, it will not work for you. I love that. You kind of, as you go, there's one of the levels you guys build in commands so that, we're not going to teach you these other more advanced stuff unless you, understand that you cannot do this to harm anyone. which is one of the reasons I like it. But yeah,
And if you
and there is a
expand,
line, isn't there, where you would use this for sales, and you want to sell something that works, but you don't want to manipulate them and have them do
right.
something they would not do themselves. You want to just allow yourself to be approachable when you come to them, that they'll listen to you, and that if what you're saying is true, they'll be more open to it. That's the best way. I mean, I do think that there is a line where people could
Yeah.
inevitably use this to manipulate people. And maybe they're unconsciously doing it already in politics and other places.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
like you said, we can, once we know that this is possible, we can protect ourselves.
yes, because you expand your awareness and you know instinctively, consciously, and as you practice with your intuition and understanding how you think subjectively, then you become aware of that. It helps you to get to the truth so that you can make better decisions. And I think it's always been necessary. And some would say today more than ever, people need to, what's really the truth? Because I mean, you're not going to get it necessarily from,
Right.
forgive me, but from mainstream. So it's a way of, yes, protecting ourselves. But the other point is too, Brian, we're always doing this, people talking. If you even studied Dr. Erickson when he was a therapist,
Right.
some people are very natural. They don't study, they haven't been trained, but they know how to get on someone's wavelength. They know how to match and mirror somebody
Right.
in terms of the tone of voice and how they speak and how they're sitting. It really is an art. And like you said, it happens unconsciously a lot. When we're conscious of it, we can do more good.
Yes.
And I would think any conscious business person, conscious entrepreneur or coach, you don't want to work with everybody. I more like to do presentations and interviews like this and courses. I love that. I do some coaching more as a service to my students to support them.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going to have a long-term agreement with coaching, I want to make sure it's a good fit, because there's
Right.
nothing more frustrating than somebody who doesn't listen, is very resistant. It's like, I want to play with people who get it.
Right.
I do a program called the Mastery, Silva Mastery. It's only for Silva grads. And I come right out and say, I only want Silva grads who get it. They're ready to rock and roll. You know this stuff works, and you want to know how to make it work better. Because we're going to spend 2 solid days exploring that and play games and exercises
Right.
on that, which you said. And so you want to make sure there's a good fit there.
So another important question, something I talk about on my channel, it feels like, especially over maybe the last 10 to 12, 15 years, we've been going through a shift in consciousness on the planet, where have you seen more miracles, more intense experiences? People are reporting greater healings. Have you noticed a trend or any change, even recently, over? It seems like something is happening on a larger scale. We can see that, as I mentioned in my book, the placebo effect isn't the placebo effect. It's much, much larger than it used to be. And it's so much so that a lot of research and studies is not working because the placebo is so powerful. And when research that was done in the 90s, it wasn't as powerful. So we are becoming consciousness pioneers, and we are growing in stature and power. Something is happening. It's hard to put our fingers on it. Somebody like you that is working with people in this field, do you see that?
Yeah, I do see it. I don't claim to understand it.
Of course
I would
not,
say,
right?
Yeah, I don't know that it's happening more so, but what I do know for sure is there's much more being revealed. There's more openness than ever before, and we're hearing more. And what they used to call the placebo is now we know the body chemistry, the brain chemistry changing to match the belief systems.
Right.
And if you look at work like Dr. Bruce Lipton and people like that, they're demonstrating this in their studies for that. That's what's so exciting now. So it's not just in Silva. I mean, we're kind of in terms of personal development and developing intuition, I think with the granddaddies and starting it, so many of the thought leaders got their start and their kickoff in Silva, and then they expanded on it and created some really cool things that they do.
Mm-hmm.
With respect, what's happening though is science is catching up, and it's making it easier to relate to. So I think people are coming out more. They're more open. There's less fear. When I first started in 71, I never mentioned meditation. I still didn't know what it was. I was doing Silva. I was entering my alpha level. Now, I
Right.
always mention meditation because it's so cool. There's so much research.
Right.
And all the, whether it be Institute of Noetic Sciences, whether we study metaphysicians, or people have been looking at wisdom schools,
Mhm.
they've all been saying this for at least 10 years, that there's a big shift going on
Right.
and evolving. And even in terms of some of the measurements of the energy in the planet and the Earth's inner
Mhm.
core and around that, there's a noticeable change, which is the subject of interpretation. I'll just put it that way.
Of
I'm not going
course.
to claim to interpret, but there's definitely a shift going on. And I find it now when I do the classes. When I first started, there was a lot of, oh, really? Okay, come on. And they came to the class. There are like 350 articles written about Silva because of this, really, come on. And then they
Right.
did the course and said, oh my God, this stuff works. And it
Right.
wound up being free, good publicity for us. Now I rarely get that. Most people coming in saying, I know there's something to this, but I'm struggling with it. Or I can't, my mind keeps wandering all over the place, or I keep falling asleep. It's a very different quality of question. It's a questioning of how do I improve this? How can I really put it to use in my life?
Yeah.
So I would say my job is a heck of a lot easier these days.
You're
You know,
not
with,
you're not trying to get rid of the doubts. You're just starting at a different foundation. And that's why people are interested in my podcast too. More people are masters of their consciousness than ever before, and more people are striving, hungry to learn more about the mind, the consciousness, spirituality on all levels. They have a curiosity that I don't remember from 10 years ago, so it's different.
and you know, if it's okay to just give a shout out to Gene Lawson, a
Yes.
common friend. I didn't even know, honestly, I didn't know about your podcast, let alone your YouTube channel. I'm not a social
Oh, it's cool.
media. I know, but it's been around, but it's wonderful. And then I looked, oh my God, the people that you're interviewing and the things you're talking about, it's like, whoa. So a shout out to her is thank you, because I had no clue. She wrote to me months ago and I was swamped. I was in all sorts of projects, and I skimmed her email and said, thank you so much. I got to put this on the back burner. I can't even really
Right.
do justice to it. It's probably 6 months ago. And then I went back to it, and then I looked and said, oh my God. It's just, I guess I was,
Well, I'm glad we connected. It worked out perfect. So
yeah, me too.
So
It's
Ken Coscia, and everybody needs to, you can check out your website at Silva Method CT, right?
.com. Yeah.
.com. And I want to just thank you for coming on. And there's still so much more that we didn't talk about in relation to Silva, and so many different techniques and revelations. And it's such a unique and powerful thing. And what an opportunity to speak with you. And I wish you the best.
you.
And everybody check out Silva. If you want to learn more, this is a great place to start. And thank you so much, Ken, and welcome to the
thank
Reality
you, Brian.
Revolution.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Return you now to your local announcers.